You never imagine betrayal, wearing the face you once loved, the hands you once trusted, the voice that told you to be strong when you were small. You never imagine its footsteps echoing in the same hallway you grew up in, carrying the same scent of cologne you associated with safety and Sunday mornings. You never imagine that the person who would teach your heart to doubt would be your wife, and the person who would teach your blood to boil would be your own father. At first, the suspicion is nothing more than a splinter under the skin, irritating but invisible to everyone else. You brush it off, tell yourself to sleep more, to work less, to stop reading thoughts into glances that pass like moths near a lamp. But the splinter still aches when you wash your hand, when you pass the mirror, when you look at her sipping tea and smiling at nothing in particular. Your wife had once been a place to rest. You remember the first winter together, when your little rented apartment breathed cold air through the windows and you both laughed at the shivers, sharing a blanket that smelled of cheap detergent and oranges. You remember the way she pressed her ear to your chest and insisted that your heartbeat sounded like a promise. Back then, you believed her. The world felt small enough to hold with both arms. Your father, after your mother passed, grew quieter in a way that made the house sound different, even when no one spoke. He had always been the kind of man who measured his words before setting them on the table, like neat folded napkins next to polished silverware. He offered advice as if it were bread, fresh and warm, and you ate it without question because that is what sons do when they admire the man who raised them. It begins with a change you cannot name. Your wife lingers a moment too long in the doorway when your father arrives for Sunday lunch. The air seems to compress around the three of you, like a jar closed too tight. She speaks to him in a tone you cannot file under any category. Polite, yes, but threaded with a softness you do not remember hearing when she speaks to anyone else. You notice small arrangements in the house, shifting as if guided by invisible hand. The mugs you keep on the second shelf switch places. The one your father likes, the one with a chipped handle and faded blue paint, appears closer to the edge, ready for easy reach. A cardigan you've never seen her wear before, light beige, delicate, hangs by the back door after he leaves, carrying a faint scent of his tobacco that no one else uses. You tell yourself that grief can draw strange lines between people. She had cried with you at your mother's funeral, held your father's arm when the hymn rose like a tired bird trying to lift itself into the sky. Kindness leaves traces, you say to yourself. Your mind has become a courtroom where you argue with yourself and always lose. Nights stretch out like long, unedited roads. You wake to the light hum of the refrigerator and the sound of your wife's footsteps crossing the kitchen. The clock reads 2:17 a.m. and the house is an ear listening to secret. She says she couldn't sleep, that she wanted water, that the air felt heavy. You nod, and the glass clinks gently against the sink like a dropped coin. Your father calls more often. He asks about the pipes, about the garden, about whether the old hedge by the fence might be a Saturday project. He never used to ask for help like this, never used to invite you over for tasks that could wait. There is a tension between his words, like twine pulling too hard on a bundle that might split at any second. One afternoon you arrive at his house and the sunlight sits on the windowsill as if it has fallen asleep. Your father is out back, trimming roses that will not behave. There are 2 cups of tea on the table, one with a lipstick kiss curled on the rim, the color a soft pink you've seen her wear. Your breath pauses, then starts again, like a car stalling on a slope. He says a neighbor stopped by. He does not meet your eyes, and you place your trust in his voice because you were trained to do so when you were a boy. Memory betrays you in small jolts. The way she smiled at him at lunch, the way she asked him about his back pain, her hand briefly touching his forearm as she passed him the salt. You remember your mother's hands doing the same thing once, and you feel an odd guilty jealousy that feels like rust in your mouth. You shake it off and call yourself dramatic. You are not the jealous type. You have never been the jealous type. She starts going for walks in the evening, saying the air helps her think. The neighborhood glows in that bluish hour when porch lights flicker on like watchful eyes. You watch her from the window for a moment, your hand against the cool glass. You tell yourself you trust her, that you will not become the kind of man who searches through text messages or follows footsteps like a detective in a cheap paperback. But your eyes linger on the curve in the road that leads towards your father's street. The stories she tells you about her day begin to feel like recycled fabric, sturdy enough to cover something but not warm enough to make you comfortable. She says she saw a friend at the market, but cannot recall the friend's name. She says she stayed late at the bookstore, though you remember the shop closed an hour earlier because the owner had mentioned it to you at the bakery. The lies are not large. That is what makes them dangerous. Small lies slip past your defenses like rain through a screen. Your father gives you a set of old tools he says he won't use anymore. They are wrapped in an oil-stained cloth that smells like the garage of your childhood. He watches your hands when you take them, and his eyes hold an ocean reluctant to speak its storm. You thank him and tell him you will fix the loose kitchen cabinet this weekend. He nods, tells you he's proud of the house you've made. You remember when he said the same thing after you married her. The same half smile, the same steady voice. The first real crack makes a sound. You hear it in a soft slip of your wife's tongue. She mentions a story your father told years ago about a fishing trip, a detail only you and he knew, the part where the boat caught on a hidden rock and you both laughed so hard you couldn't breathe. She tells it as if she had been there, as if she knows where the rock sat in the green water. You ask how she knew, and she startles like a deer, then says you must have told her one. You never did. The bed you share feels colder on some nights, like the sheets themselves have learned to keep a distance. She turns away, as if guarding a small flame you cannot see. You reach to place your hand on her back and feel her flinch the way someone does when a memory hits them unprepared. You pretend you didn't notice. You talk about the weather. You talk about nothing. Silent sits on the nightstand like a glass of water. No one will drink. You go to your father's place on a Wednesday because the pipes. Again, the pipes. The house smells like lemon cleaner and old paper. You find a hairpin on the arm of the sofa, small and gold, the kind she wears to keep her hair from falling into her face when she cooks. You hold it like an artifact from a civilization you do not understand. He says nothing about it, and neither do you. The pin disappears the next time you visit. Your heart starts making bargains your brain pretends not to hear. If she is lonely, you will do better. If your father is broken, you will hold him up. If this is a shadow, light will erase it. You promise yourself you will not accuse, not without proof, not without a reason that can stand in the daylight. Your patience becomes a rope, and you do not yet know whether you are using it to climb out or to bind yourself tighter. One night you return home to find the house smelling like your father's aftershave. It hangs in the hallway, as if he has just walked through, a ghost with good manners. She says your father stopped by to drop off a book he thought you'd like, the one about the old sailor who loses his compass and finds his courage. You ask where the book is, and she says she forgot to bring it in from the car. Later when she sleeps, you check the car. There's no book on the seat, no book in the trunk, only a loose grocery receipt and a coin wedged by the mat. The betrayal you fear becomes a living thing. It paces the rooms, sits in your chair, waits in the kitchen between the refrigerator hum and the tap that sometimes drips. You begin to notice the way her phone sleeps face down, the way she silences it when you walk in, the way your father's phone goes to voicemail more often now when you call in the evening. You feel ridiculous, foolish, paranoid, but the living thing breathes louder. You try to take her somewhere nice, a small attempt to stitch the seam before it rips. A cafe on the corner with old photographs on the walls, the kind where the teaspoons clink in a tender rhythm and pastries are dusted with sugar like a light snowfall. She smiles the way a person smiles at a photograph they are not in. You ask about her day, and she tells you details that don't match the map you know like your own hands. You stop asking. The coffee goes cold. Back at home, you open a drawer to find a folded note, scented with the faintest trace of cedar. The handwriting is not your father's, it is hers, but the words point like an arrow. Tomorrow at 4, I'll be there. Use the back door. Your stomach revolts like a sea turning. There is no name, only the stubborn intimacy of a plan. You stand perfectly still, as if motion might bring the ceiling down. You do not confront her. Not yet. A strange clarity arrives, cold as a hospital corridor. You place the note back exactly as it was, and you touch the edges of your world, as if you might remember where everything belongs before it all moves. You wait until morning, because you need to imagine a night where this could still be a misunderstanding, a misread, a mistake. The waiting becomes part of your body, like a second pulse. The next day, the air wears a thinness that makes you feel as if you are walking underwater. She leaves at 3:30, a scarf pulled around her neck, though the weather does not require it. You watch from the window, count to 100, and then you follow the path your life takes without your permission. You move quietly, like a person entering a chapel, because what you are about to witness will be a kind of faith destroyed. Your father's street looks the way it has always looked, cracked pavement mended by time, a lamppost leaning slightly as if it is listening, hedges trimmed by careful hand. You park a house away and pretend you are anyone else. The back alley carries the smell of damp leaves and the sigh of a distant television. You hear a gate click, a sound that rolls through your bones like a line of thunder so far away you are not sure if you imagined it. You see her hand on the latch, a simple, domestic gesture. She disappears behind the fence. You hear the low murmur of voices that your memory claims it could identify in darkness. For a moment, the world does not move. A bird crosses the slice of sky above and you stare at it, as if it might deliver a message from a kinder universe. You step forward with the caution of a man crossing ice that has begun to crack. The back door opens for her the way it has opened all your life. Your father stands there, and for the first time you see the invisible thread between them, pulled tight, a line that shines in the late afternoon light like a spider web glistening after rain. He reaches for her elbow the way a man reaches for something he already believes is his. She steps inside with a familiarity that steals the air from your chest. You do not move closer. You stand at the edge of your childhood, and it will not let you in. The smell of cedar and tobacco, the old floorboards that creak like instruments tuning, the kitchen where your mother used to hum while stirring soup. Every image crowds your mind, each one tipped now with a poisoned edge. You feel a rush of heat arise from your stomach to your throat, a tide you cannot stop without drowning in it. The door closes, sealing their voices. You hear only the thin lace of sound that escapes around wood and weather stripping. Laughter, a soft crash of something placed on a counter, the intimate rhythm of domestic life. You picture her removing her scarf, him placing it on the hook your mother used, and you want to tear the world apart with your hands. You do nothing. You listen to the sound of your own breath, a stranger in your mouth. Time becomes elastic, stretching so long it threatens to snap and whip back at you. You count your heartbeats and watch the light on the neighbor's fence shift from gold to ash. The living thing called Betrayal now stands right beside you, a shadow matching your shape, whispering poison directly into your ear. You tell yourself to wait, that there is a way to confront them that will still leave you a man when the day ends. The house swallows another quiet sound. You swallow your own name. When she finally leaves, the sky has the wounded color of fruit, bruised under a thumb. She pulls the gate softly. The the way someone does when they are trying not to wake a sleeping child. You step back into your car because you do not trust your legs to hold the weight of what you have learned. She does not see you, or if she does, she keeps her eyes on the road ahead, as if looking anywhere else might make the truth visible on her face. You drive home behind her. Two cars traveling the same road with different worlds inside them. In your chest, everything has already exploded, and yet you drive carefully, signal at every turn, obey the speed limit. The discipline feels cruel, like being asked to sing a hymn while your house burns. She parks, goes inside, and when you enter moments later, she is at the sink, washing her hands. The water runs colorless as the lies she has told. She says she was at the market. She shows you a bag with apples that still carry the cold of the store. You look at them as if they are props from a theater production about a happier family. She reaches for you with a question in her eyes that sounds like, "Please don't." You nod, and the nod tastes like ash. You go to the bathroom and stare at your face in the mirror. You look like a man who has been told the weather will never be good again. That night you lie in bed with the ceiling hovering inches above your nose. She turns on her side, away from you, and sleep gathers around her like a careful blanket. You do not sleep. You inventory every sound of the house, every shift and murmur, the settling of wood, the reluctant sigh of the air, the lonely confidence of the refrigerator's hum. Somewhere in the middle of the night, the silent confession you have been avoiding rises in you like a tide that does not recede. You know. You have seen enough to know. Morning brings the kind of light that makes everything look more honest than you want it to be. You sit at the kitchen table with hands wrapped around a cup you do not drink. She moves through the room with the choreography of a life that has not changed. Your father's number sits on your phone like a weight. You do not call him, not yet. You listen to a clock that has never been so loud. The truth waits with you, relentless as a ringing that does not stop when you press your hands over your ears. You decide you will not be the kind of man who destroys himself without hearing the guilty speak. If there is a confession, you will hear it. If there is a lie, you will dismantle it. If there is a story that can make sense of this, you will require it of them. The resolve settles in your bones with a terrible calm. You clear your throat and call her name, and the sound of it feels like the first word in a language you do not want to learn. You call her name, and the syllables float between you like a feather refusing to land. She turns, towel in hand, eyes widening just enough to register that you are no longer the soft outline of the man who lets things pass. You tell her to sit. The chair legs scrape the tile like a match, striking a line of heat down your spine. She smiles in that careful way people do when they are preparing to lie. You watch the smile lose its balance. You ask where she was yesterday at 4. Her throat tightens almost imperceptibly. A swallow crosses it like a shadow of a bird. She says the market again, or maybe the library, her words arranging themselves into a small, polite barricade. You don't raise your voice. You fix your gaze on the steam curling from the kettle, on the thin ribbon of it, winding into nothing. There is a note in the drawer, you say. She blinks. You can feel the house lean closer to hear. She says you're tired. She says grief still plays tricks on people. Your father's grief, your grief. The city's slow, heavy grief that hangs on summer like wet laundry. You listen to each word and hear the weight that sits beneath it, a weight with your father's cologne. Your name in her mouth sounds like a plea and an accusation at once. You hold your breath, and the room loses color. You ask her to tell you the truth. You do not ask for pretty explanation, not for the careful porcelains of excuse. You ask for what happened in the house you grew up in, under the roof where the rain made a music you once thought only your family could hear. She shakes her head and her hair moves like a curtain caught by an old draft. She says there's nothing to tell. Your hands are very still on the table, knuckles pale as bone. When lies fall into a silence and do not break it, they become a kind of confession. You stand, and the chair returns to its place with a dull thud. You tell her you are going out for a while, the way someone tells a neighbor they will be on a short trip, back soon, leave the plant by the window watered. She nods, as if that solves something. The street outside smells like rain that never arrived. You do not drive straight to your father. You circle the block once, then twice, as if trying to shake loose a dream. You pass the park where you taught yourself to ride a bike, the rusting fence that still has the dent from when you misjudged your speed. You remember your father running toward you, laughter in his breath, pride in his eye. You pull the car to the curb and press your forehead to the steering wheel. The horn is a quiet pressure against your skin, a border between one life and the next. When you reach his house, the gate complains softly. The hedges bow as if in a ritual they do not understand. Through the back window, you can see the kitchen table, where birthdays were staged with cake and candles. The wooden fruit bowl your mother bought from a market by the river. The hook where she used to hang her apron. An extra mug sits out, the chipped blue one. Your father's silhouette moves across the wall like a memory learning to walk. You try the back door. You have known it stick and sigh your whole life, the way it asks for a patient hand. It opens. Inside, the air has that closed, warm quality of a room that has hosted recent conversation. You hear water running in the sink. Then the tap turns. A drawer slides. A spoon touches ceramic. You call his name. When he steps into the doorway, his face wears both the man who taught you how to tie a tie and the stranger who knows your wife's perfume. He says your name the way a doctor says your name before a difficult sentence. You look at his hand because you cannot bear the weight of his eyes. He has the same hands in old photographs, open-palmed, honest, a man ready to carry what needed carrying. Your voice sounds older when you use it. You ask him if she has been here, today, yesterday, ever, and the last word echoes like a dropped coin rolling under a refrigerator where no one will retrieve it. He tells you to sit. You do not sit. The table between you is a border and a history. He looks toward the hallway that leads to the living room, to the couch that still has the faint dip from where your mother sat. His jaw works around a truth, as if it were a nut too hard to crack. When he finally speaks, his voice has the roughness of a man who slept with a stone under his tongue. He says it started after your mother died. He says he was lonely in a way that made the days ring. The words do not enter you at first. They hover just outside your skin, reluctant to live where they will do damage. You ask him who reached for whom. He winces at the geometry of blame. He says it wasn't like that, which you understand to mean it was exactly like that, but the telling of it wants mercy. He says she came by with soup the first time, that you were at work, that grief makes people sit closer than they should, without noticing they are leaning. The house remembers everything. You stand beneath its remembering and feel very small. He says nothing happened for a long time, only talking, only listening, only the kind of kindness that people never think is dangerous until it is. Your father is careful with his verbs. Happened, started, couldn't stop. He says your name and his voice breaks on it, the way wood splits beneath a wedge. You realize you have been holding your breath for so long. Your lungs feel like glass. You ask him if he loves her. The question tastes like metal. He does not answer right away. He looks at the window, at the hedge that needs trimming, at the tin of biscuits your mother kept stocked, even when there was no one to feed. Finally, he says he doesn't know what to call what happened. That love is the wrong word, because love is supposed to be clean, and there is nothing clean about this. You hear the floorboard in the hallway whisper under weight. It remembers everyone's footsteps. You turn, because some part of your body knew before your eyes did. She is there, at the end of the hall, pale as a curtain, washed too many times. You do not know how long she has been listening, but the way she wraps her arms around herself tells you she heard enough to have a second heartbeat. The three of you stand in a triangle that throws no shadow, because everything is light now. brutal and complete. You ask her to speak. Your voice is hoarse like a bridge rope. She steps forward, and the floor answers quietly. She says your name, and the syllables fall apart. She says she came to help in the beginning, just to help, just to be a person in a house that had lost its woman's voice. She says you were working late, and she didn't want to burden you with another weight on the scale of your days. She says she made tea. She says the house felt like a church and she forgot to be afraid. The details come out like beads, one after another, each with its own shine of shame. She tells you about afternoons that blurred, about the comfort of a story told without judgment, about hands reaching across a table because grief asks for touch. She tries to say it wasn't passion at first, and the at first hangs between you like a bridge that no one should test. Your father stares at the sink as if it might tell him what to do next. You ask them how long. The number they give lands with the dull certainty of a stone. Months, not weeks. More than a season, less than a year. Enough time for habits to learn the path through the house in the dark. You can feel the arteries of your life constrict. Your mother's face appears in your mind with the clarity of a portrait lit by candlelight. You imagine her standing where you stand, listening. No one says her name. The silence does that for you. Your hands want to break something, not because rage is all you feel, but because it offers the simplicity of action when everything else is complicated beyond language. You place your palms flat on the table instead, feeling the old varnish, the tiny scratches from forks and keys, the blunt ghosts of parties and Christmases. You ask them if they were careful. The stupidity of the question embarrasses you even as you ask it. Careful is a word for people who are trying not to hurt someone. They were careful enough to keep you ignorant. Your father tries to step toward you, and you step back. The movement is automatic, like the way you used to avoid puddles on the walk to school. He nods, accepts the distance like a punishment he deserves. He says he never meant to take anything from you. You laugh then, a short, low sound you would not recognize if you heard it on a recording. You tell him he took the axis. You tell him he took the thing that tells you which way is north. She says it is over. She says the words quickly, as if speed will make them true. She says she came today to end it, that the note was a goodbye, that she was going to tell you, that she almost told you last week when you asked about the book in the car. Almost is an insult. Almost is a thief who returns an empty wallet. Your throat burn. Your eyes sting, not with tears yet, but with the chemical haze of betrayal evaporating into the light. You ask her the only question you have left that feels like it will change anything. Do you love him? She looks at your father. The air ripples, a heat mirage across asphalt. She looks back at you, and the look is a ledger. She says she doesn't know what to call what she feels, that it came from a place with no map, that it is tied to loss and to the sound of your father's voice when he spoke about your mother as if her absence were a person in the room. You hear the last line under the last line. It was not you. You are not a violent man. Your body reminds you of this by refusing the command to destroy. Your shoulders shake once, like a tree hit by wind. You tell them both to sit. They do. The kitchen becomes a courtroom again, but this time you are not arguing with yourself. You want to extract a timeline, an anatomy of what happened as if knowledge might disinfect the wound. They give you pieces, days, an afternoon at 4, a rainstorm, a cup of tea, the sound of laughter heard by no one else. You press your fingers to your temples as if you could push the images away from the inside of your skull. You ask if anyone else knows. They shake their heads. 2 students with the same failing grade. You feel something shift inside you that is not rage, not grief, not even humiliation. It is clarity of a kind you do not like. You see a line ahead where you become a man living with ghosts that never shut up. You decide you will not live there. You stand, and the chair legs complain again. You tell them you are leaving this house and you are walking into the air. And when you return to your own home, something will be different. You do not say what, because you do not yet know what justice looks like. when the jury is you alone. Your father nods slowly, a movement that belongs to an old man, to a man who has climbed the stairs to the roof and realized the view is not worth the height. Outside, the sky has become a blank page too bright to look at. You walk without seeing, the world reduced to textures against your skin, the bite of air inside your throat, the grit under your shoe when you cross the driveway, the rasp of your sleeve across your wrist. A neighbor waves, and you find yourself raising your hand like someone returning a salute in a war that never ends. You sit in the car and watch your father's front door as if it might apologize. On the drive home, you speak to no one, and yet a voice speaks in you. It is not your mother's, and it is not your own. It is that part of you that was born the day you learned people can do anything and still sleep at night. It tells you to be careful with the next thing you do. It tells you that anger wants to be fed and will eat parts of you you might want later. You grip the wheel until the leather warms under your palm. When you step inside your house, the air smell is your air. The shape of the rooms is your shape, and yet you do not belong to it the way you did when morning began. She is at the table, hands folded, the tea gone cold. She looks up with a hope you cannot stand to look at directly. You sit across from her because standing makes you feel like a storm. You say you need the whole truth, and then you need silence to think. She nods, and her nod is a child's nod at the end of a scolding. She talks. The story is both exactly what you feared and worse in small, human ways. She talks about the first time your father cried in front of her, about how the room felt holy in a way that made them both forget they were made of the same ordinary materials as sinners. She talks about the first time she lied to you, and how that lie taught the next one how to walk. She talks until words pile up around your feet, like leaves you will never finish raking. She ends with the sentence you knew was coming, and still were not ready to meet. I am sorry. It lies on the tablecloth, small, sincere, useless as a bandage left in its wrapper. You nod once because some reflex in you remembers manners. You tell her you will not decide anything tonight, because decisions made on the edge of cliffs tend to send people over. You stand. She reaches for your hand and you step back. The movement surprises both of you with its gentleness and its cruelty. You sleep on the couch, which is to say you lie in the dark and listen to the heater click on and off. You wonder if your father is also awake, if he is staring at the same indifferent ceiling, counting the same stripes across the blind. You wonder how two people can feel this much and still exist inside the polite container of a neighborhood. You recall the hairpin on his sofa. You recall the lipstick on his cup. Your mind lays out the evidence as if pinning photographs to a corkboard. Morning makes things look possible without promising anything. You rise with a new quiet. You tell her you will speak to your father again. She says she understands. She says she will not call him. The promise sits between you like a thin glass that might crack if the temperature shifts. You dress and your shirt buttons find their holes as if guided by a hand not your own. You leave without touching her shoulder, and the door closes with a softness you mistrust. At your father's, he is already waiting on the porch. The sunlight cuts him into angles you have never seen. He gestures to the chairs and you refuse with a small shake. He tells you he has made arrangements to stay with a friend for a while, that he thinks it is better not to be near. He says the word near as if proximity itself is the sin. He says he will tell you anything you ask. He will sign anything you need signed. He is offering his hands with nothing in them. You ask him the question you will ask yourself for years when this day revisits you in your sleep. When did you know you could lose me and decide to proceed anyway? He closes his eyes. His breath counts 4, 5, 6. He says the truth, naked. The first time he realized what was happening, he told himself it would pass. The second time, he told himself it could be managed. By the third, He was the kind of man who could stand in a kitchen and swear he would stop tomorrow. He never did. You tell him you are his son and he is your father, and those are not roles people should be allowed to resign from. He nods because he agrees, because he has always agreed with the rules of the world, because agreement has never been his problem. You realize then that the hardest part of this story is not rage, but the loss of the story you told yourself about the kind of man your father was. You feel grief stand beside you like an old neighbor. It has come to help you. You leave him there on the porch with his silence folded up beside him like a newspaper. You walk to the car and see your reflection in the window, eyes rimmed in red, mouth set in a line that makes you look like your grandfather. You think of the word legacy and want to throw it into a fire. You drive without destination, letting the city draw its own map beneath your tires. The ordinary lives of strangers blur by in scenes that do not require betrayal to be interesting. When you return home, the decision you did not want has taken a chair at your table. You sit across from it. You tell her you will separate for now. The sentence tastes like a key placed on a counter. She nods, and the way her shoulders release tells you she expected worse, which is almost worse. You say you will take the guest room while you make arrangements. She says she will call her sister. The names of practicalities line up like cups on a shelf. That night, you do not cry. Your body saves that for later, for a smaller, crueler hour. You write an email to your father and leave it unsent. In it, you try to speak without ornament about what he has taken and what he has made impossible. You address him by his first name and delete it, and type father and delete that too. You end up with nothing but the date and a blinking cursor. In the days that follow, the world pretends normal, as it always does. The mail arrives. A stranger asks you for directions. A plant on the windowsill leans toward the light and demands nothing but the physics of leaves. You move through hours as if carrying a sealed jar. Inside it swarm your questions. When did this become unstoppable? What could you have done? What part of you was easy to step around? You do not open the jar because chaos loves air. On the third day, you find in a coat pocket a photo your mother once tucked into your hand. It shows you and your father standing knee-deep in a lake, both of you laughing at a fish that was never caught. You study his face then, the uncomplicated joy, the trust between you like a sturdy plank. You press your thumb to the paper and leave an invisible print. You slide the photograph back into the pocket and decide you will not let that image be eaten completely by this new one. You meet your father once more, this time at a park where no objects will betray anyone. You sit on a bench with too much sky above. He tells you he has ended it completely, that he will not call, that he will not answer, that he will take whatever exile you decide is right. He does not ask for forgiveness. The absence of the request is almost a kind. You tell him this is not a story with forgiveness at the middle. Not now. Maybe later. Maybe not. He nods as if he has been given weather. You come home to the quiet mechanics of an ending. She has a suitcase open on the bed, and the small private sound of zippers becomes unbearable. You stand in the doorway with your hand on the frame, the way a person leans into a wind that is stronger than expected. She tells you where she will go. She tells you she will not reach out to him. She says your name and asks if there is anything you want to say before the door turns into a border. You search the room for a word that can hold a life and find none. You help carry the suitcase to the car because cruelty is easy and you do not want to be easy. On the sidewalk, a child rides past on a scooter, the plastic wheels buzzing like bees. The everyday insists on itself. She sets the case in the trunk and closes it with a small, decisive motion. For a second, you both stand in the same place you stood when you promised forever, except the light is different, and so are your faces. You say, "Take care." The phrase is a slice of bread offered to someone who needs a house. When she drives away, A piece of the street looks newly exposed, as if a tree had been cut down. You go back inside and sit in a room that is not yours anymore, and the silence is finally allowed to be what it is, a measurement of absence. You exhale slowly and hear in your own breath a sound you have never heard yourself make. It is the sound a person makes when a machine that has been running for months finally turns off. You call your father and tell him she has left. He says he is sorry again, and you tell him to stop using that word as if it were a cloth he can use to wipe a stain that goes through the fabric. You tell him you will not see him for a while. He says he understands. You end the call and place the phone face down the way she used to. The gesture startles you with its inherited intimacy. You turn the phone back over as if that can undo something else. In the quiet that follows, you begin to ask the questions people ask when the crash is over and they are crawling from the wreckage. What part of me led here? What part of me will lead me out? What story will I tell to make this survivable? You walk from room to room, touching the backs of chairs, the edges of picture frames, the cool coin of the doorknob. You say your own name aloud once to see if it still fits. It does, but there is more space in it now, and some of the space hurts. At night, sleep arrives like a cautious stray. When it finally lies down at the edge of the bed, it brings dreams that rewind and replay and re-edit scenes without your consent. In one of them, you are 10 again, and your father is teaching you how to keep your balance on a dock while a boat bumps against the posts. He says, bend your knees, feel the give, don't fight the water, work with it. You wake with your legs bent, your muscles remembering an instruction that was always about more than boats. The next morning, you stand at the sink, and the mirror offers you a man who has been chained and does not yet have the vocabulary to describe how. You decide to write, not to them, not even to yourself exactly, but to the part of you that stood in that kitchen and did not break the table. You take a pen and fill a page with the smallest facts: the date, the weather, the taste of the air, the sound of a neighbor's dog, the way the light lays itself across the floor like a long scarf. You make a list of things that did not betray you. Days begin to stack. You answer emails, you buy groceries, you take the long way home to avoid the street where your father lives. You begin to understand that healing is not a straight road, but a field you must cross in tall grass, without seeing exactly where you will place your feet. In the crossing, you discover parts of yourself you didn't know could hold weight. The floor could have given way. It didn't. You did not become someone you will hate tomorrow. And yet beneath the slow, honest work of repair, the story keeps beating. It wants to be told to someone who will hold it without flinching. It wants witnesses. You imagine the faces of friends, the tilt of heads, the softening of eyes. You imagine the hum of sympathy and the sharp glint of curiosity. You imagine your mother listening from wherever absence lives. You realize you will have to decide how this story is carried in your life. As a weapon, as a warning, as a weight, or as a lesson you did not ask to learn. One evening, you take the photograph from your pocket and set it on the table. You light a candle, not for ceremony, but for light. The small flame breathes regardless of your family's failures. You say out loud what you need to hear. This did not start with you, and it will not end you. The sentence sits in the room like a modest guest who cleans their own cup. You do not feel better. You feel correct. You begin to sort through objects the way an archaeologist does, not to discard, but to understand. You touch the scarf that still holds her shape, the tool set your father gave you wrapped in its old cloth, the book of recipes your mother handwrote and spattered with oil. Each carries an inscription you can read now in a new light. You decide which to keep near, which to place in a box, which to return to a shelf without ceremony. You realize ceremony is not always kindness. When the phone rings late, you let it. It stops and then starts again, as if the person on the other end believes persistence can braid itself into forgiveness. You answer. Your father's voice is careful. He says he found a letter your mother wrote years ago. and never gave anyone, and he wonders if you want it. You say yes without deciding why. He says he will leave it on the porch in an envelope with your name. He will not wait to see you. The relief inside that fact is a new kind of grief. The letter is in your house now. You sit with it for an hour without opening it, as if letters can ripen on a table like peaches. When you finally slide your thumb under the flap, the paper sounds like mild rain. Your mother's handwriting is a river you haven't seen in years. She writes about love like it is an orchard that requires pruning, about mistakes like late frosts, about forgiveness like a season that comes whether anyone is ready or not. She writes to you, a future you, a you she could not imagine and knew perfectly. You read the letter twice, 3 times, and then you fold it along its old crease and place it under the photograph of you and your father in the lake. You do not feel absolution, and you do not feel instruction. You feel accompaniment from a woman who knew something about people and the delicate revolutions of their hearts. You sit there until the candle gutters and the room fades back into its ordinary night. In the days after the letter, you find that the sharp edges of the story no longer cut you with every step. They still exist. You still bleed if you press too hard. But you can move in the room without bracing against every corner. You think of your father on his porch with his silence. You think of your wife in a borrowed room with her suitcase. You think of yourself like a man walking home from a long, hard shift, keys in pocket, a light left on. You are not ready to speak to either of them. You are ready to speak to yourself in a new tone, one that does not confuse being strong with pretending you are not hurt. You begin to say yes to small invitations, a coffee with a friend who doesn't ask for details, a walk that ends at a place where water moves, a morning where you turn your phone off and let the world occur without you for a while. The world obliges, steady as a clock. Then one afternoon the doorbell rings, and the past stands there in a plain envelope again, held now by your father, in person. He could not stay away. He is thinner. The lines on his face have deepened like a map that has been folded and unfolded too many times. He asks for 5 minutes, and you understand that 5 minutes can be a country where people live for years. You let him in because you are tired of talking to a porch. He sits with his hat in his hand, the way men used to. He tells you another truth you did not ask for, that he once saw your mother looking out a window as if far away, and only years later did he realize that even good marriages carry small, private distances. He says this not to excuse himself, but to place his failure on a table already scratched by other lives. He says he will not ask you to hurry anything. He says he will be where you place him, as a son places a father when the roles refuse to be simple. You tell him you will not pretend pain into history, as if that makes it smarter. You tell him you will not exile him, as if that makes you safer. You tell him you will not invite him back into your daily life, as if he had not taught you how to distrust a kitchen. You leave the sentences where they are, liminal, honest. He nods, and his nod is marvelous in its humility. He rises. At the door he turns as if to say something ceremonial. He doesn't. He leaves. The house receives his absence more gently this time. You breathe, and the breath feels like something returning from a long trip. You pick up your mother's letter and read the last line again. Be kind to the pieces of yourself you meet in the dark. You say all right to the room. You do not know what kindness will look like tomorrow. You know what it looks like now. A glass of water, a window opened, a chair that does not scrape angrily across the floor. That night you sleep, truly, if not entirely, soundly. In the morning you open the curtains and let the day in without condition. The light lands on the table and turns the wood warm. Somewhere far away, a train hums and then fades. You stand in that light and realize that the story is not over, because stories aren't, but that this chapter has closed with a hint that did not splinter. You are still here. Your hands are your own. Your name fits again, though differently. Later, when you begin to tell this story carefully to someone who has earned it, you will say that the worst part was not the image that first came to mind when you understood, nor the quiet cruelty of logistics, nor even the disloyalty of familiar rooms. You will say the worst part was losing the story of the man you admired, and you will say the necessary part was refusing to lose the man you are becoming. They will nod, and there will be a pause in which both of you respect the size of what cannot be said. Eventually, you will gather the courage to decide what to do with the house where you learned to walk, to set the table, to lie, to tell the truth. Perhaps you will sell it. Perhaps you will keep it and let it stand empty for a season, like a field that must rest before it can bear anything. Perhaps you will go there one day with a can of paint and cover the walls in a color your mother would have liked. You will stand in the doorway and teach yourself to breathe without counting. And though the world will continue to offer you surprises you would never have ordered, you will begin to recognize the ground again. You will fold the letter more carefully along its crease. You will set the photograph in a frame. You will allow yourself occasionally to laugh without immediately examining the laughter for cracks. You will learn the simple, hard art of letting the past be heavy without making yourself its mule. You will not confuse endurance with love ever again. In the days that follow that difficult morning, when the hinge closed without splintering, an old hunger returns, not for answers, but for steadiness. You go to the market where your mother used to buy pears and stand in front of the wooden crates until the scent of ripeness and wood pulp settles your breathing. The vendor recognizes your face as if names were a luxury. He wraps the fruit in thin paper, the same kind that used to crinkle in your mother's hand, and you carry them home like small moons cupped in a bag that remembers other journeys. You decide to visit the woman who lived next door when you were a child, the neighbor who used to lend your mother sugar and stories. Her house smells of lavender and warm dust, the kind that holds afternoon light in suspension. She opens the door with eyes that have learned to keep secrets alive without letting them rot. You sit at her kitchen table, and the old linoleum pattern is a map you could still walk with your eyes closed. She pours tea as if pouring courage, and the steam rises in thin veils. You do not tell her everything because you do not need to. You tell her enough. You say your father's loneliness learned to talk to your wife's loneliness, and that conversation burned down a room you didn't know was flammable. She listens with her head tilted slightly, the same way she used to listen to the radio in the evenings when the news refused to behave. She makes a sound that is not quite sorrow and not quite surprise. She places her palm on the table and does not move it, as if offering you a flat stone to stand on for a minute. She says, grief steals good judgment in clean daylight, and shame finishes the theft at night. She says people do not betray because they are brave. They betray because they are afraid. She says the hardest part will be learning to let your father be both the man who taught you to straighten your shoulders and the man who taught you to look over them. She says you will have to live with both pictures until one of them stops asking for all the light. Her words do not repair anything, but they keep you from slipping. On the way home, you pass the schoolyard, where you once learned to listen for the bell. A flock of starlings throws a ribbon of shadow across the ground, and you stop to watch the shape move in one mind with 1,000 bodies. You understand something simple and unglamorous. A family is also a flock, capable of turning together without announcing who gave the signal. Next time, you tell yourself, you will be near the front, where the first sudden shift begins, not because you can stop it, but because you can see it when it starts. You write 2 lists on a single sheet of paper, one headed boundaries, and the other headed mercies. Under boundaries, you write time apart, no contact without consent, truth without embroidery, no meetings in houses that remember more than we do. Under mercies, you write speak without spitting, rest when rage wants a spectacle, leave room for silence to do what shouting cannot. Remember the better picture sometimes, so the worst picture does not win everything. You pin the paper to a corkboard, like a map for weather you cannot control. That night, you dream that you are walking through your father's house while it floats on a lake, your mother's letter on one table, and your wife's scarf on another. You can only carry one. In the dream, you fold the letter into your pocket and push the scarf gently into a drawer, as if promising to return when it will not drown. You wake with the taste of lake water on your tongue, and the room smells like wood that has never been wet. You breathe until your body believes you again. Morning steadies you with small chores. You fix the loose kitchen cabinet with the tools your father gave you, the oil-stained cloth easing around your fingers like the grip of an old friend who has complicated you. The screwdriver turns without protest. The hinge holds. You test it twice, then 3 times, and the door opens and shuts obediently. Not everything that has been used by the past is untrustworthy. Some tools are loyal to the hand that chooses where to press. When you call your father, the line clicks and then opens into a quiet that feels like an empty church. You tell him you want one final meeting to set the terms of the future, that you need it in the old house, not because the house is innocent, but because the house remembers better than any of you. He agrees with a voice that does not ask for anything. The appointment is a nail driven into a board that has shifted too much. You tell her the same. One final meeting in the place where everything began and ended. She agrees, and her yes sounds like someone returning a borrowed book. You choose afternoon because the light will be honest then, not the forgiving blush of morning or the lying softness of evening. You bring your lists, boundaries, mercies. You bring your mother's letter folded in your pocket, like a compass that will not show north, but will remind you there is such a thing. When you enter the old house, the air is at the exact temperature of memories, a touch cooler than comfort, a touch warmer than regret. Your father stands in the kitchen with his hands clean and empty. She arrives minutes later, her steps careful, as if she is walking on the crust of a pond in winter. The 3 of you stand in geometry again, but today the lines know their purpose. You ask them both to sit, and for the first time, they obey without searching for a better arrangement. You read the letter aloud, not all of it, not the private parts that still lift and ache like a healing bruise, but the sentence about forgiveness arriving like a season, uncaring of schedules, and the line about pruning what you love so that it can bloom without strangling itself. The words turn the room into a different kind of weather. No one moves for a while. The house creaks the way old houses do, reminding the living that it will outlast them gently. You place your lists on the table and speak to the air almost as much as to them. You say you are drawing a circle. They do not belong in it for now. In that circle, you will eat, sleep, work, and try to remember how to be the person you were built to be. Outside that circle, they can stand wherever their choices have placed them. They both nod, and the nods land on the table like small weights, keeping paper from blowing away. You ask them to do one thing for you, something that belongs to no court and no counseling session. You ask them to speak your mother's name in this kitchen. You ask this because the house has held her quiet long enough, and because the 2 of them have been speaking around her as if she were a ghost who needs permission. Your father says her name first, and his voice drops into a register he hasn't used since the day she died. Your wife follows, and the name sounds new in her mouth, careful, apologetic, and strangely tender. It is not absolution, and it is not punishment, but something essential moves then. Like a stubborn window finally sliding in its frame, you feel a current of air from somewhere, the kind that turns a hot room tolerable. You say thank you without deciding if you mean it for their compliance or for the house's relief. You stand. The meeting is over. There are no grand exits, no slammed doors, no proclamations that will sound foolish when repeated. just footsteps on old wood and a latch lifting the way it always has. Outside, in the sideways light, you see the garden your mother loved trying to be itself. Plants are both relentless and forgiving. Vines remember their trellises even when the hands that trained them are gone. You make a small promise to the yard for no one's benefit but your own. You will return with clippers and twine, and you will rescue what can be rescued. You will not pretend the neglect never happened. You will take photographs in your mind of before and after, and you will not confuse the after with perfection. You file for separation the next week. The papers arrive in the mail with their indifferent fonts and their appetite for signatures. She signs without contest. You sign with a pen that has written grocery lists and birthday cards and once a vow. The ink looks the same in every context. It does not know what it is doing to you. You place the envelope in the outgoing tray and sit very still until the sound of the mailbox lid closing tells you the future has added a hinge. Your father moves to a smaller place on the other side of town, a building with balconies and a lobby plant that tries too hard. You do not visit. He sends you a note to say the plumbing works and the neighbors are courteous and the sunrise makes the rooms honest at 6:30. You read the note and tuck it behind your mother's letter without deciding why. Some documents belong together not because they agree, but because they have been asked to hold the same weight for a while. On a Sunday morning that feels unremarkable on purpose, you take your mother's recipe book and choose the soup she made the winter you were 12, the one with onions and patience. You chop slowly, resisting the temptation to rush into flavor. The kitchen fills with the smell of thyme made edible. When the broth begins to speak in small bubbles, you lean against the counter and let your body believe that comfort can still arrive from your own hand. Therapy begins on a Wednesday at 10 in a room with diffuse light and chairs that are kinder than they look. You sit with a stranger who is talented at silence. You tell them the story in a sequence that makes sense only today. Next week, the same facts will arrange themselves differently, and that will be okay too. You say the sentences you never said in the kitchen because there was too much history in the chairs. You say, "I am not broken," and your voice believes you halfway. The other half is why you came. On your walks, the city becomes a catalog of textures that have nothing to do with betrayal. Brick warmed by afternoon, the polite push of wind against your jacket, the sound of a bicycle chain settling onto a gear. You learn the names of trees you once ignored. You let yourself be startled by the brightness of a lemon in a storefront bowl, by the courage of an old dog climbing stairs. You collect these truths the way some people collect coins, not for their worth, but for their weight in the pocket. One evening, a box appears on your doorstep, your wife's handwriting on the label. Inside are items that once lived in a shared drawer. A matchbook from the cafe where you decided to try for a child and then decided to wait. A key to a mailbox you no longer own. A photograph of the two of you in a mirror that doubled your happiness so convincingly you mistook it for prophecy. You sit on the floor with your legs crossed like a child and let the past inventory itself without commentary. You write her a letter, not cruel, not kind, simply true. You tell her what part of you loved her and what part of you went missing while you were both trying to be good people in a story that kept asking for less of you and more of your pretending. You do not ask questions because you do not need answers from her anymore. You wish her a life that does not need witnesses to be real. You sign your name, and for the first time since the kitchen, it feels accurate. When your father's birthday approaches, you stand in the stationery aisle of a store where the cards are arranged in the hierarchy of human hope. Congratulations, sympathy, apology, blank. You choose blank. At your kitchen table, you write 3 lines and stop before the 4th because you do not yet have a 4th that can end the message without lying. You mail the card with a stamp that shows a lighthouse. You do not know if you are the lighthouse or the ship. It is enough to say there is shore. You return to your mother's garden with clippers that click like tiny metronomes. You correct what can be corrected, tie what can be tied, let go of what will not be trained. Dirt finds the crescents under your nails and makes them honest. Sweat threads your spine, and the air tastes like green. A neighbor walking by pauses at the fence and says it's coming back. You nod, because coming back is the only victory that makes sense to you now. On a rain day, you sort the boxes in the attic. You find the sweater your mother knit badly and wore proudly. A book report you wrote in 5th grade about a whale who refused to be ordinary. A cracked mug that fit your father's palm like a second heart. You keep the sweater. You keep the report. You throw the mug away not because it is guilty, but because you can choose not to drink from what hurts. The garbage can receives it without judgment. People begin to ask gentle questions, and you learn to answer them without bleeding. You say, "We are not together right now." You say, "My father and I are figuring out the size of our silences." You say, "I am learning how to be alone without being lonely." Their faces arrange themselves into support, curiosity, relief, discomfort. You bless them silently for attempting this small choreography around your bruises. The first time you laugh without catching yourself, it is at something ridiculous. A squirrel losing an argument with a plastic bag. The sound sneaks out of you and into the air, and nothing bad happens. You let the laugh live. You do not interrogate it. You do not save it as evidence that you are fine. You are not fine. You are something more interesting than fine. You are alive in a room where the windows open. At night, the story returns with soft teeth. You see the kitchen, the blue cup, the hairpin, the scarf on the hook, and you can stand near the images without becoming them. You do not forgive anyone for what they did when they believed they were the only ones in the room, but you begin to forgive yourself for not being everywhere at once. You begin to forgive yourself for being human, the way your mother's letter described. A person who makes weather and then must live in it. One morning you wake, and the first thing you feel is not dread. You lie there and enjoy the absence like a song that finally stops getting stuck in your head. You have breakfast with the window open to a polite spring. The toast is exactly the color you meant it to be, and the butter coins out in a way that satisfies your narrow hunger for small perfection. The newspaper, which is terrible as always, is only terrible about the world and not about your kitchen. You consider this progress. You think about calling your father to ask him if he remembers the doc lesson from your dream, the bending and the give. You do not call. Some teachings work better when they stay inside your body. Instead, you bend your knees a little when the day begins its ordinary waves. You do not fight the water. You work with it. You discover that you are not a boat, and you are not the dock. You are the person who learned the difference. A friend invites you to a small gathering where no one knows your story, and you learn the freedom of being unremarkable again. You watch the angle of light in a stranger's hair, the way a couple negotiates the last piece of cake with mock ferocity, the ceremony of people washing dishes together. You participate in none of it and all of it. On the walk home, you accept that joy will not apologize to sorrow each time it enters the room. They can be neighbors without offense. The old house sells to a family who arrives with bicycles and a dog with bad manners, and boxes labeled with instructions to themselves. Open first, winter coats, kitchen nonsense. You stand across the street for a while and let the picture of their life overwrite the last frames of yours. Not to erase, but to layer. You do not say goodbye aloud. The house never spoke your language anyway. It spoke its own, in wood and heat and pipes and thresholds. You wish it well without performing anything for yourself. When the papers finalize, when the judge's stamp democratizes the end of things, you go home and do nothing ceremonial. You do not burn photographs or smash plates or cut your hair. You sit by the window until the light leaves the sky. and returns to wherever it sleeps. You say your mother's name because you want the room to know the root system of your life survive. You say your own name because you want to hear how it carries through the dark. It carries. In therapy, you try on the word forgiveness like a coat you inherited and aren't sure you like. You wear it for a few minutes. You take it off. The therapist nods in that practiced way that says the point was not to keep it, but to learn what it feels like against your skin. You discover you are less allergic than you expected. You put the coat back in the closet. You leave the door open. Months pass the way months always pass. Once they realize you will not chase them, you change the music you cook to. You call an old friend you hurt years ago and say the sentence you once couldn't. I'm sorry, and I won't defend myself. You learn that repair has a taste, and it is not sweet. It is mineral and clean like water from a deep well. You drink it anyway, because thirst is honest. One afternoon you find yourself near your father's building. You do not go in. You sit on a bench across the street, where the tree leans in a way that suggests a confidant. You watch people enter and exit with their groceries and their arguments, and their small, complicated loves. You realize you are no longer carrying the jar with the swarm. You left it somewhere without noticing, and for a moment, you miss the weight, like a person who misses a limp they taught themselves to walk with. Then you are grateful without showing it to anyone. That evening, you write a short note to your father. I am not ready to sit with you, but I am no longer using anger to stand up. I hope the sunrise is still honest at 6:30. You send it. He replies days later with one sentence, "It is, and so are you." You read it once and do not try to make it more. You place it behind the lighthouse card in the drawer that holds things that refuse to be resolved and taught you patience instead. When you finally speak your story aloud to someone you love who did nothing to cause it, you tell it with space around the words. You resist the old temptation to make the listener choose sides, like choosing teams in a schoolyard. You do not let anyone make heroes or monsters out of people who were neither, and sometimes both. You let the story be a room you walk through together, touching what you need to touch, ignoring the rest. When you finish, the person across from you is still there. So are you. And now, as you stand at the edge of this telling, you see what the story has been sculpting in you while you were busy surviving it. A loyalty to your own eyesight, a respect for the first small splinter, a gentleness that does not ask to be fooled, a refusal to be the mule for the past. You have learned that betrayal often enters the house wearing familiarity like a borrowed coat, and you have learned that your job is not to board every guest, but to keep your name on the deed. If you are listening to this and you recognize the quiet in your own kitchen, if you have smelled a stranger's cologne in a hallway that should be safe, remember this: you are allowed to draw a circle and stand inside it until your hands are your own again. Tell us where you are watching from, if you wish. Tell the secret you carried for too long, not to feed the fire, but to invite the rain.